I'm gonna be honest with you guys, today's video confuses me deeply. I can tell just by the Goji Center thumbnail that it's about like the great Kong who kicked Godzilla out of his home, which later became Tiamat's cave eventually. I'm just confused. Basically, the new movie has kind of changed a bit of the comics, and I have no idea now what the MonsterVerse storyline is. Godzilla like imprisoned the apes and all this stuff long ago, back when, according to the lore, Godzilla was much smaller and getting beaten up by other Kongs. I just don't even know anymore. Either way, leave a like on the video, subscribe to Goji Center, and let's get into it. Alright.
Godzilla fanboy alert. This episode will depict scenes featuring Godzilla getting his ass handed to and repeatedly bested in combat by a member of the great ape species.
Featuring Godzilla's ass? That's all I read.
Fanboy discretion is advised. No, seriously, dude, if you can't handle a little bit of monkey beating up a big chunky lizard, leave.
Damn.
Have you gone yet? Okay. Today on Goji Center, the analysis platform will shed light on one of the most infamous members of the great ape species of all time. Berserker Titan, known as the Rival, whose most notable feat was to kick Godzilla's ass out of his own crib long enough for Godzilla to come back for a rematch after many, many years. Subscribe to learn more about Titans, dinosaurs, and other cool monsters.
This comic was so cool too because it implied Kong isn't even the greatest Kong. Like, there was other apes that were just elders and much more just war-torn and battle-ready and have done way more things. I don't even know if any of this is canon anymore, bro.
Now, to be completely honest here, there isn't a lot of information about this Titan floating around. So, just keep in mind that some of the things mentioned in this episode may not be 100% proven true, but rest assured, we'll do our best to speculate only upon already confirmed facts. For those of you who are still here and still have absolutely no idea of who we are about to discuss, don't worry. We'll give you a really quick rundown of who we're talking about, what happened, followed by a Titan breakdown, along with a speculative explanation of how it beat Godzilla, and obviously how this dude met his end. And it's quite gruesome, so make sure you stick around until the end. The Rival appears very briefly in a sort of flashback that Godzilla himself had in the graphic novel Godzilla Dominion. This book pretty much follows Godzilla as he travels around the planet establishing order, his dominion, amongst all the other rogue titans and some humans stirring up trouble around the planet, finalizing with Godzilla taking back control of his old lair. It's in this lair where he had his first recorded standoff against Titanus Tiamat. But before Tiamat took over this place, there used to be another Titan that lived here. This one, the Rival. The book tells us that Godzilla originally came to fight this ape, pretty much for a rematch. Very quickly, we see this image. A really neat detail about this picture is that this is a snapshot forever ingrained in Godzilla's memory. Similar to how you remember that image in elementary school of that big bully that beat you to the ground when you refused to give up your lunch money. This scene is what Godzilla kept in his memory when he was getting his ass whooped.
That's so true. First time I got beat up was 3rd grade. Wasn't even really beat up. I just got punched in the stomach so hard I got the air knocked out of me, but it was like the first time it ever happened. I remember it perfectly. I don't even remember elementary school. I only remember that specific moment.
Note how this image is taken from a low angle looking up. Yeah, that's the image Godzilla kept in his head before he took off running, holding a grudge that would last for hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of years. Up next, we'll discuss some cool details about this ape. Enjoying this episode? Make sure you subscribe and help support the channel by checking out our merch store.
That's an adorable plush, but also, that monkey was living hella rent-free in Godzilla's mind.
Admittedly, in this episode, we'll be doing the absolute most by milking the crap out of this image to analyze this Titan, since this is all we have. But not to bore you with this image, the 3D artists at Goji Center came up with a speculative reconstruction of this ape. As you can see on both the image and 3D model, the Rival was an animal that was pretty much scarred up. Another animal that was similarly scarred up from another cinematic universe was Peter Jackson's King Kong, featured in the 2005 film. Both of these show signs of being veteran fighters, being resistant to pain and repeated injuries, and no strangers to the spectacle of blood and gore. We'd argue, however, that this one looks a little more crazy. Drew Johnson, the artist who illustrated this book, did a great job illustrating the crazed maniac that handed Godzilla a humbling L. We find that this guy is quite muscular, similar to Kong, who had quite the physique compared to the other great apes that he encountered. Height-wise, we aren't entirely sure about this, but surely a height tall enough to rival Godzilla at this point in time. Speaking of which, there's something that we need to make clear here, and this may help explain why this great ape was able to not only defeat Godzilla, Godzilla, but send him running. It was mentioned by the author of this book that this confrontation involved a much younger Godzilla in his late adolescent years. There's no mention of how tall or heavy he was at this point in time, but our best guess is that he was a little shorter than his appearance in 2014 and perhaps a little bit more lean.
I guess that's just what confuses me. Godzilla x Kong implies that Godzilla's always been big enough to imprison the apes, at least long enough to go back to when the apes were in prison. But in the TV show, he was like way smaller, just in like the 60s or the 40s. I don't know when this crap took place. The 50s maybe. Either way, you get the point. It's like, when was he big, and was he whooping monkey armies when he was small or what?
Somewhat similar to his appearance in the Bikini Atoll incident seen in Monarch Legacy of Monsters. Here, Godzilla would measure a bit shorter than 350 feet in height. If we do assume that the rival was more or less around the same size as Kong, we're looking at an ape that seemingly does have a good chance at beating the lizard. At the point of Godzilla's flashback, we see that unlike the younger Gojira, this Kong was already fully grown. A veteran fighter with potentially hundreds or even thousands of years of experience under his belt. More specifically, this Titan would have a repertoire of complex combat maneuvers, learned to craft many kinds of weapons, and may have already encountered a Gojira before.
You know, things are getting crazy when Goji Center whips out repertoire. Things are getting nuts.
Or animals like Godzilla, as Toho would have us say. So,
damn you to hell, Toho. Kaiju like Godzilla, they can't say they killed any Godzillas before, so it's so confusing. So it's like there's only been one Godzilla now in the entire storyline. Then where did Kong's weapon from? Is that dorsal plate directly from Godzilla? Like, there's so many clues throughout the franchise that there's multiple Godzillas, and then Toho just makes him change it last second. Like, there's only one Godzilla now. It's like, God, you people have ruined everything.
How exactly did this guy manage to defeat an atomic lizard with atomic breath?
I may be being overdramatic, and I'm probably wrong about a few things, purely ran by emotion, but I mean, come on, we had such a cool thing. The great Godzillas vs. Kong Wars was so cool.
Well, based on where this happened, we may have some answers. The confrontation between the rival and Godzilla was very likely instigated by the rival himself. Since it's 100% clear who kicked out who in this situation, we can pretty much draw up how this played out. One day, Godzilla was simply chilling in his lair when all of a sudden this great ape barged in, catching Godzilla off guard. Why off guard? Well, we do know Godzilla has very good senses. Granted, they were not as good at the time. Godzilla's senses became many times more powerful after Mothra passed down her powers during this scene in King of the Monsters. Before this, Godzilla did have good senses, but in this case, they weren't good enough to detect a big ape entering his house in time.
The heck you have good senses, but not detect a giant monkey walking into your house? How are you gonna like that? That's awful senses. That's like the worst senses in the whole world. Even I can detect that.
Ape managed to stealthily walk up to the door of Godzilla's lair and pick a fight. Now that we got that out of the way, let's try to figure out the obvious. Why didn't Godzilla, with atomic breath, defeat a great ape with no blast abilities of his own? There could be two answers to this. One, given the size of this lair and its rocky composition, this Kong could have leveraged this rough terrain and used it against Godzilla, dodging any atomic rays heading in his direction and using the terrain itself to block the impacts, eventually closing the distance between them and beating down the young Gojira with pure blunt force. Or two, perhaps in this case, Godzilla refrained from using the atomic breath in this fight. Now, why on earth would Godzilla do that? Let's go back to this scene in Godzilla vs. Kong. If you remember well, it only took one atomic ray to send the interior of this temple collapsing. A cavern similar in size, if not bigger in space than the lair Godzilla was in, using this atomic breath could have spelled doom for Godzilla himself, sending the entire cavern crashing down upon both of them. This is just a theory, and by all means not a canon explanation at all. But if true, it could actually speak to Godzilla's own virtue. Any high testosterone and enraged Gojira would definitely fire away with it.
Look at the way those cheeks perfectly come together.
Atomic blast, and in the act destroying the enemy, its home, and ultimately himself. However, if Godzilla did indeed decide to retreat, knowing it could have won if he used the atomic breath, this may have been the very first example of Godzilla pulling off a tactical retreat, knowing that one day, when it grows up, it would have been able to physically take on this ape without using its atomic weapon.
Look, I love Godzilla as much as the next guy, but this feels a bit like coping. Maybe he just got beat up, man. Godzilla retreated because he's smart and knew he'd defeat him another day, or he didn't want to use his beams on purpose. I was like, or maybe he just got his ass kicked. I mean, he was a much younger Godzilla. This was a very battle war-torn ape. Apes are mean as hell, bro. It's possible Godzilla just didn't have the chops back then.
And in the act, destroying his own house. This may explain why Godzilla refused to fire his atomic breath when he was fighting Tiamat in this same exact location. If you remember, Tiamat nearly defeated Godzilla in Dominion. Had it not been for the sudden change in terrain, Tiamat would have pulled off a win. Here, using the atomic breath would have been risky, potentially making Godzilla destroy his own lair, trapping himself, or worse, killing them both.
Wait, someone catch me up. Wasn't the majority in that fight in the open ocean, though, and then it went into an underwater cavern, and that's where Godzilla... But, like, for the most part, I feel like a lot of the fight was in the open ocean when Godzilla could have used his beams. I can't remember why he didn't use his atomic breath here. There was a reason, I'm pretty sure.
We aren't trying to downplay the rival's win in any way. After all, this is a theory, and Godzilla still could have used his atomic breath against this ape, but whether he did or not didn't really matter.
You know, it'd be badass if this monkey charged it holding a giant boulder and just blocked his beam like a freaking shield till he was close enough to grab a hold of the lizard. What's crazy, though, is these monkeys would usually kill whatever they're beating, so there was a way for it to be more of a draw for Godzilla to escape. Otherwise, I think it would have eaten Godzilla's head like the monkeys do.
The point is that this guy won. However, and it's important to bring this up now, there's also the matter of the author of the graphic novel suggesting in an interview that this guy may not have been the only ape present in this scenario.
Plot twist.
In a podcast interviewing the author.
I hate how they do that. You just put it in the book. They put like part of the content in the book and then they make up the rest on Twitter after. It's like, just put it all in the damn book, bro.
He mentions that a singular Kong specimen, or several, came in and pushed him out of here when he was younger and weaker. Note how he uses the word or, meaning that either one may be true or not. Whether this was just to appease the Godzilla fans, who knows? So, does this negate everything that we have just discussed? Until more official evidence surfaces, we don't know for sure. But the only concrete evidence we actually do have here is the fact that the book itself portrays Godzilla having beef with one particular ape and not a whole group of them.
That's why it feels like such a cop-out. I read that, dude. I at least skimmed through the pictures and read some of the words. That monkey beat the crap out of Godzilla. And I was like, well, there may have been other monkeys. It's like, dude, you didn't put it in the book. You had no intention of there being other monkeys. You're just cowarding out on Twitter. I don't agree with one monkey beating up a Godzilla whatsoever, but you put it in your book. Stand by it, you weenie.
Specifically mentioning that the said rival was the one ape who used to dwell here. Godzilla's rematch was with this dude specifically, not any other ape that may have been there watching Godzilla get his butt handed to him. So, now that we've got that out of the way, what happened after? In Godzilla Dominion, after defeating Tiamat, the G-Man started wondering what had happened to the dude that had originally kicked him out. Why wasn't he here when the G-Man came back for a rematch? The answer is quite frightening, and it has to do with this one, Tiamat. Year 2019. During the events of Godzilla King of the Monsters, Monster Zero, also known as Ghidorah, let out an alpha call to wake up all the Titans. One being Tiamat, who at the time currently resided near Stone Mountain, Georgia. Shortly after Godzilla killed Ghidorah, Tiamat went in search of a new home and found it best to settle in Godzilla's old lair. The author of Godzilla Dominion, Greg Keyes, specified that it was Tiamat who killed this ape at some point in time. We just don't know when exactly.
She's
the
amazing.
The most obvious answer would have been right after Godzilla King of the Monsters.
This is what made Godzilla X Kong more upsetting. Then Tiamat rises up, this badass sea dragon Hydra monster, kills the great monkey and does all this other crazy stuff, and then just gets one-shotted in the freaking movie, man.
Tiamat pulling up to this lair and killing the great ape, who at the time had to have been very old and not the combatant it used to be.
That's the other thing, too. That monkeys don't get that old, man. Scar King was only even like a few thousand years old, right? Like, Kong's gonna look like his hairline's gonna go one day. I can't imagine monkeys, especially Tiamat, no way.
But there's a bit of a plot hole here. It would have taken a long time for the corpse of this great ape to rot and reveal this skull by the time Godzilla arrived, meaning that Tiamat would have killed this ape a very long time ago, before the events of King of the Monsters. But let's pretend for a moment that Tiamat did kill this ape shortly after the year 2019. Is there an in-world canon explanation as to why this ape's corpse rotted so quickly? There might be, actually. Now that we know for sure who killed this ape, we need to delve deeper into the abilities of Tiamat that may shed light into this mystery. The Monarch Titan dossier of Titanus Tiamat explains that this animal can release a phosphorus ink that bleeds through the water, which serves to blind opposing titans. Phosphorus is a chemical element that, if touched, can cause poisoning and corrode skin. White phosphorus, more specifically, can not only cause deep, painful burns, but also penetrate underlying tissues and break down flesh in record time.
Oh, damn.
So, what happened to the rival? This guy may have had to endure the most painful death yet. A titan like Tiamat who can boil the water surrounding her with scales and fins that serve as blades and with a phosphorus corrosive ink that breaks down flesh? It's no wonder the only thing left of this ape was its bare bones.
I like
this
that.
This would have been a grim sight to see, not to mention that this skull is detached from the rest of the skeleton. So, apart from being painful, this ape suffered a humiliating end.
That's how I want to go out, my head melted by a sea dragon, defending my lair. That's how a man goes out right there. This video was pretty awesome. I agree with a lot of it. I agree with most of it. My only confusion is now Toho's made it so in the Legendary franchise, there's only one Godzilla. And I get Toho has to be involved with Godzilla because Godzilla's theirs. They made it and America could very easily ruin it like Godzilla 1998 all over again. But the Monsterverse was going good. There was no reason to stick their fingers into it, man. It's like, dude, just focus on -1 for a bit. Let us handle a Legendary Godzilla. He's not gonna die like Zilla. Like, we got that part on lock. Just I don't know. I get they just want to have one Godzilla because he's meant to just be like the sign of man's hubris over nature and that kind of stuff. But damn, dude, we had a good thing going. Either way, this video is pretty damn cool. Leave a like on the video if you made it to the end because that's awesome. And subscribe to Goji Center because they're freaking cool too. And I'll see you next time.